This is the JWN Podcast. Gil Shuler is a true veteran graphic designer who came up when graphic design was still an analog craft. Having maintained a successful design career and studio through the shift to digital in the 90s, his ability to design with intent and vision has never wavered and has only sharpened throughout his successful career. Today, he's celebrating the release of his book Barn Jam Posters, which is a collection of 180 of his favorite designs for the Allendale Green's weekly Barn Jam showcase of upcoming musicians. For art enthusiasts and musicians alike, this collection is a masterclass in design and creativity that showcases a seasoned professional's intersection between the love of his craft and his love of music. I had a blast getting to know and learn about him and his work, and I know you will too. Here's my conversation with Gil Shuler. I love this because a lot of the podcast guests that I've had on so far have been people I've known. I read about you through a Post and Courier article that Kaylin Oyer had posted, and I was like, shoot, I bet you we know a lot of people in common. And then I looked at the body of work. I looked on your website at the body of work that your client list, and this is just what you're showing it on your website. Anyone who lives in this area is familiar with their work, whether they know it or not, because College of Charleston, Taco Boy, the Halsey Institute, as we were discussing earlier, that you do a lot of their design work, Charleston Music Hall, Theater 99, Palmetto Brewery, Two Blokes Brewery. So that means people who don't even live in this area, who drink beer, has seen your work. The entire town of Mount Pleasant, which I thought was pretty cool. The Tryon Theater, which I wanted to bring up because my wife is from Tryon. She grew up in Tryon. So when I saw that, it stuck out for me because I was like, I've been to that theater. I saw like a puppet show there once during some festival.
Scott Lane and his wife, Scott's from here. He bought that place a good many years ago and renovated it and asked me to do the identity. And, Tryon's a real interesting town, beautiful town. And Scott's a really cool guy. You should reach out to him.
Yeah, it's one of those things you don't even realize it till you see it, and then you're like, oh, I know what that is. I've been there, and then you kind of start putting it together. So that's why I was like, I bet you'd be really cool to sit down and talk to you about your artistic background. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Sumter, South Carolina, which is like 100 miles from here. Actually, from Summerville, it's probably like 80 miles. But lifelong South Carolina. My family goes back to the 1700s, Utahville, the Schulers in Utahville, and the other side of my family, Sumter and Shaws in Sumter.
Man, so what did your parents do for a living when you were growing up?
My mom was a school teacher, first grade teacher. She did that, got her master's, and became a guidance counselor near the end of her career, but a lifelong public school teacher. And my dad, I grew up on a farm in Sumter. My dad was a lifelong farmer, his dad and his dad before him. And he went to Clemson. My grandfather went to Clemson. They're agricultural engineers. And so we grew up on a farm, but his dad unexpectedly died when I was like one.
Mm-hmm.
So he had to work because the farm just couldn't produce for him. And I have 3 siblings. At that point, my dad had 3 kids. I was the youngest at that point. And he went to work for a paint plant, Southern Coatings Chemical Company, and was the plant manager there for really till he retired.
Wow.
And I grew up on a farm, but and worked on it a little bit, but mainly we leased it out to people, and it was real ideal.
Yeah, you grew up in rural South Carolina.
Yeah.
And somehow discovered this talent for graphic design, or just design in general, but art somehow crept its way into your life. What got you started down this path?
Well, as a kid, my family's awesome. We're real close. And my parents were, real God-fearing Christians and walk the walk, talk the talk. And and they always stressed higher education. And one of the things was when you were a little kid, when you got to be first, second grade, you'd take piano lessons. And we had a a farmer down the road whose wife taught piano, and so that was just in line. Once you got that age, start taking piano. My sister was a really good piano player. My brother was too, and so I started taking. But I could always draw, and I took like 2 weeks of piano lessons, and I went to my mom and said, I'd rather take art. And she said, okay. And so I started taking private art lessons when I was in second grade, and started doing oil painting in like third grade, and did that up until like 10th or 11th grade, and won a bunch of awards. And my parents' house is full of these oil paintings and drawings that I've done. And at that point I was kind of burned out on fine art and had to go to college. My folks were like, I don't care if you have a direction, you're going to college. So I went to junior college for a couple of years, and that's where I was introduced to graphic design, which was probably around, I graduated from high school in 79. So 80, 81, I was introduced to what graphic design was. And I was like, wow, I dig that. Because I was always loved music, loved skateboard, ephemera, and we skateboarded in high school, and then albums, of course, just album covers and album art and anything to do with that. And
Was there an album that stuck out from your youth that you kind of just like would stare at and go like, oh, is there any, or?
Oh yeah. That's a good question. I like that. Like I used to look at Trace Hombre's all the time, ZZ Top record. I mean, it's a real simple one, but it just had this feeling. And I'd read the liner notes, and of course, all the Zeppelin stuff, Houses of the Holy, always stuck out to me.
All the Zeppelin albums pretty much had the most interesting cover art. The concepts that went into that, like the physical graffiti, to me was so cool that you could take the jacket, the vinyl jacket out of the cover, and you had these different pictures that you could line up in the windows, and it was just like,
I had one.
So cool.
I had a Cheech and Chong Trace Hombres that me and my brother begged my dad to give us one Christmas, and it was the one where you pulled out that they were in a car door, looking out of a car door. The whole cover was the side of a car.
Yeah.
And then you pull out the door, and it would expose the inside of what was inside the door, and it was all this weed. So it was awesome.
The stuff they couldn't show on the shelves of Walmart. Yeah.
So we lived, that kind of stuff. I was always fascinated with it, but as a kid, I never thought, who's doing that? And is that a job?
Yeah. Like who came up with the idea to create, what was it, Sticky Fingers for the Rolling Stones with the zipper on it?
Yeah, I think that was Warhol. I think Warhol did Sticky Fingers.
And you start putting those things together. You're like, well, how did this happen? And then you look at the work that they do, and you're like, well, this is cool. Okay, so you're in school, skateboard culture, rock and roll.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking late 70s. So, I mean, skateboarding late 70s was mainly going down hills, and, it was Sims, Skis and things like that. So it wasn't it was a different kind of skateboard culture than was then, but it was the basic 70s. And so we'd get magazines and buy t-shirts and love that kind of stuff. And I don't know, I got introduced to it. I was good at art. So when I went to college and I didn't have a real direction, I took art classes because I could succeed in those fairly easy. And that's where I was introduced. And that's when I transferred to Western Carolina that had a really good design program, and got introduced to the concept, the idea of what it's all about, the idea behind a logo mark, or the idea behind an album cover, the idea behind, a political poster, or what concept meant, which I was totally oblivious to. Here's a Southern boy who grew up out in the sticks, and I mean, exposed to different things. I wasn't like I heard you talking to Tim recently, and you talked about when you grew up in the North, right?
I grew up in New York, yeah.
In New York, okay. So first time I ever went to New York City was when I was in 81, when I was a junior in college.
That was a very different New York City than the one I grew up in too. Yeah.
Southern boy walking around Times Square in '81, man.
Oh
At night,
man,
man, it
you
was,
must have got whiplash from
oh,
looking
dude,
around.
it was like, holy moly, what is going on? But it was rough too. But that was the gist of exposure. I mean, we didn't have where I grew up. People always laugh about this. Is we had a party line. Our
Wow.
telephone was a party line, which was like 7 houses, and the closest house was a quarter mile away, and the rest of them were a mile or two. You know, it was farmers. And so when I was in high school, if I had a girlfriend, I might go call my girlfriend, pick up the phone. There'd be somebody talking on the phone. I'd have to hang it up and wait. Other times, when it was my turn to get on the phone and call, I would hear somebody pick up, and I'd be like, "I'm on the phone," and be, "Oh, sorry."
Oh my
And
gosh.
so we had a party line. We didn't have cable. We only had 3 channels on the television. I mean, I'd go to school and people would be watching Happy Days, and then I was like, "Dude, I don't get that
Yeah.
channel.
They'd make a
I've never
reference
seen
joke
that."
and
I'd
you're
be
like,
like, "Dude, I don't know that."
they'd be like, "Hey," and you'd be like, "What?"
Yeah, exactly, man. It was wild. But I think back on it, and it was a real idealistic childhood. I mean, grew up out in the fields. I used to go sit on my front porch and watch the combines go by, and I hunted. Always had dogs, and walked and stayed in the woods a lot, and we always laughed when we would go on family vacation. We'd always take a friend with us, and whether we would go to Edisto a lot of the time, and when we'd come home, my dad wouldn't take any of our friends home until we went up to the garden and picked the whole garden, which was like
He put you to work.
a half-acre garden. It was huge. Yeah. So
Wow.
it was great. It was a great childhood. I was real lucky.
There's something about growing up with those kind of limitations that at the time you might not recognize as a good thing until you're older. And then you look back on it and you're like, man, if I didn't have that, what would I have become? Like how did that color my character as a human being? I can relate a lot to what you're saying. I didn't have a party line, but I had a grandfather. I grew up with my grandparents,
Okay.
and I had a grandfather who had a rule that you could not be on the phone for more than 10 minutes. No reason why. He just didn't want you on the phone.
It's a good rule.
But he installed a light because we had old school rotary phones.
Oh, yeah.
And he installed a light on his phone next to his chair that if anyone picked up the phone anywhere in the house, the light would go on so he could see. And at 10 minutes, he'd just look at his watch. And then at 10 minutes, he'd pick up the phone and tell you to get off the phone. And yeah, trying to date girls as a teenager when you had your grandfather get on the phone and after 10 minutes and tell you get off the phone, it was like, we got to rethink this.
Well, we used to, because my brother's 2 years older than me and my sister's 4 years older than me. So we were just 2 years apart. And so when my sister's in 12th grade, my brother's in 10th, and I'm in 8th. So
yeah,
real formative years. And my grandmother lived on the farmhouse, like a quarter of a mile up in the field, and she was older. She couldn't hear. And a lot of times she would leave the phone off the hook. So we would go pick up the call. And we could hear her television in the background. It's like, geez, Mommy left the phone off the hook. So then I'd get on my bicycle and ride quarter mile through a field up to her house and bang on the side of her door, on the side of her house, because she couldn't hear me. And she'd come out there. I'm like, Mommy, you left the phone off. She'd say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She'd put it back on, and I'd ride back, and I'd get on the phone.
And then another neighbor's on the phone.
This happened a lot, man. This was a regular thing. You got to go up there and tell your grandmother to hang up the phone.
That's amazing. That's amazing because it's not that long ago. Like you think party lines, you think 40s, 50s, but you're talking late 70s, and you still had them because you're in rural South Carolina.
Yeah.
And so you get into college.
Well, I was ready to go. I mean, when my brothers and sisters were both out of school, I mean, they were both in college, and actually, my oldest sister graduated Clemson in '79 when I graduated from high school, and I had a little sister that is 9 years younger than me. So it was just me and her at home for my 11th and 12th grade year. And so I was ready to go. I was ready to get the heck out of the house, And so I went to this junior college and basically just had a good time for 2 years and and then realized, I should probably start thinking about doing something, what my direction is going to be. And that's when I got introduced. And then when I went to Western, it was great because Anderson College was a junior college I went to, and a lot of people from South Carolina that, love Clemson,
Right.
can't get in. If they can't get in Clemson to begin with, they'll go to like Anderson College,
The bridge
and
program.
then transfer
Yeah.
there. So I knew tons of people at the school, lots of my friends went to Clemson, lots of my friends went there. So it really wasn't it was just like living out of my house with a bunch of high school people, friends, and
13th grade.
right, which is not really good for me. But I had a blast, don't get me wrong. But so when I went to Western, I knew nobody. I drove up there by myself in my Volkswagen Bug and started from scratch, and very eye-opening. People from all over the place. It was really I don't know. It's kind of weird to say coming of age, but I grew a lot emotionally, mentally during those 2 years. I learned a lot, grew a lot.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great.
That's awesome. So you finally got that taste of freedom, and you got to really come into.
Well,
your
I
own.
had the taste of freedom for the first 2 years. I was, back in those days. It sounds like I feel like a really old man because 79, I was in junior college from 79 to 81. And even my whole year, I graduated in 83 from Western was, when you went to school, went in your dorm, you had a phone at the end of the hall and you talked to your folks maybe once every 2 weeks, maybe once a month. It's not like that anymore. Everybody talks to everybody all day long and text or whatever. And so you were away from home, you were doing your thing and writing bad checks, whatever however you got the bologna and cheese that you needed for the 1:00 meal, but, so going to Western on my own doing that was a real breakthrough for me to really step outside my comfort zone.
Yeah. And you graduated with a BFA?
BFA in art, Bachelor of Fine Arts degree with a concentration in graphic design.
So back then, graphic design was a very different animal than it is now.
Well, I mean, basically, if you look at the history of graphic design and, really fine branding and fine logo marks and annual reports were a big deal back then, but even album covers and stuff like that, it'd been going on forever since Toulouse-Lautrec.
The concepts of.
Yeah, well, Toulouse-Lautrec was probably one of the first really considered illustrators, graphic designers. I mean, there's probably plenty more, but it was the difference in it now and then is basically the tool of the computer.
Yeah, the craft has kind of shifted as far as how you get it done, but the concepts of coming up with
concepts are the same.
Interesting.
I mean, good design is always about the idea and about the concept and not necessarily fashionable style. But yeah, it was, I got to learn when I went to Western about these great artists like Saul Bass and Ivan Shemayoff and, Milton Glaser and just these Woody Pirtle and these amazing designers. And it was all learning up there, was learning the skill, like you say, that we do on the computer now and take for granted, but coming up with a concept, sketching out the concept, and then once that's approved to do the final art is, illustration board, ruling pen, ink, and French curves, ruling pens, whatever, to draw a logo that you do, 24 by 36 so that when you shoot it on a stack camera, reduce it down, it's really sharp and really perfect. And so
now you can do that on your phone.
Exactly.
My first job out of college, because I went to college for information technology, but I worked in an advertising agency.
Oh, yeah.
And to see, this is in the late 90s, to see the guys that were old school designers, right? And see the younger people who just fresh out of school they're making the same stuff, but their processes were so different. Like the old school guys had these big offices with old school tools that they would still make use of. So you'd see these old school guys,
Yeah.
some of them struggling with the inevitable shift into a digital medium. How did you make that transition?
Oh, dude, it's kicking and screaming.
Wow.
It was, don't get me wrong. I mean, I worked for 10 years on my own. When I got out of school, I worked for an ad agency, a couple of ad agencies for like a year and a half. And then I was like, they were mainly print shops, print design shops. I was like, I can do this on my own. I'd rather cut out the middleman of an account executive and go straight to the client. So I worked for 10 years on the boards, before computers were real prevalent. And it was a tough transition. But on the other side, when I think about it, it was kind of an easy transition too, because we would buy type. We
Right.
would do typesetting. And so we'd get our copy of verbiage, whether we're doing an annual report or a book or whatever, or advertising, and spec out the type, send it to a type house, 12 over 14 Helvetica bold, this, and mark it all up and then get it back. Well, my type bills were like close to $3,000 a month.
Wow.
So then when computers come in and you realize, now as they're kind of growing and getting better, you're like, dude, I don't need to pay these people $3,000 a month when I can just do it, set my own type on the computer and do the whole layout right there. And so it business wise is kind of like forced, but I also kind of waited until I was comfortable with where it was. I wanted to
Right.
be able to go in there and go from being able to produce large pieces, whether it's on the board and paste up, to be able to produce the same thing, but on the computer, not have too many steps in between. So I got on the bandwagon pretty good. And then, computers ramped up pretty fast.
There was a scary point, though,
Oh,
where
dude, I watched that gray bar land. We used to call it gray bar land when you'd just go to save something and you'd just sit there for
and
5 minutes watching that gray
and hope it
bar.
didn't crash.
Right, exactly.
Because there's one thing that you didn't have happen in the analog world is a malfunction which loses 8 hours of work.
Well, let me tell you, I have spilt India ink over a whole project before.
I guess so. Yeah, that's
or bled from an X-Acto knife cut all over everything, but that's usually college late night stuff. But it still happens, and clients don't change.
Yeah, that's true.
Clients haven't really changed. They still expect it yesterday, and but I've always enjoyed working with clients. Nothing against them, but the advent of the computer has been amazing for graphic design, and I think it's improved. It's hard. I was going to say that it's improved what we see in the world, but there just seems to be probably just more clutter.
Well, it's made
than
it more
anything.
accessible.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a graphic designer, but I can fake it. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm dangerous. In other words, I know how to use the tools to get the result. Now, the difference in my own self-design stuff and what you would come up with is exactly what you said at the beginning, is the intent.
But I'm not a photographer either. You're a photographer, right?
Yeah, but the intent of what, of you knowing how to convey intent graphically.
Oh, sure.
And
But it's
interpret
same with photography too. I think
Yeah.
you would probably agree that everybody's a photographer now too.
Yeah. They're and for similar reasons, they're not going to compose things the same way. They're just going to document what they see. They're going to hold their camera up and take the picture. And these days, they're going to take the picture and put 15 filters on top of it. So now you're looking at a clown version of a human being. But
I've seen that.
Yeah, but in the graphic design world, it's much more accessible now to get these tools. Like even when it first went digital, getting a copy of Quark Express was not easy. It was not cheap. But now I can spend $20 to $50 a month and subscribe to Adobe Creative Cloud and have the exact same tools that, that a high-end graphic designer like you would have, that a high-end photographer would have, that a high-end movie maker would have. I have all the same tools for
Absolutely.
pennies compared to what it used to cost.
It's awesome. I have a shirt that my wife gave me years ago that says Quark Legend on it. Quark Express. We used the hell out of that. But
I was not a fan of that from on the IT side when I was working IT for that graphic design company. I hated Quark Express so much. It was a nightmare.
Well, we always hoped, because I've always worked in Illustrator and Quark Express, because I always did, whether it's a book or an annual report or large multi-page design stuff, you'd have to do it in a multi-page program like InDesign or Quark Express. And back then, there was no InDesign. There was just Adobe just had Illustrator and Photoshop.
Right. InDesign was always trying to catch up.
To Quark.
Until Quark just laid down one day, and you're like, "What happened? Did someone find dirt on the guys at Quark?" And because it's almost like they just went away one day.
Well, I think it wasn't much that they went away, in that Adobe just took over.
Yeah,
and they made it seamless. It's totally seamless from Photoshop to Illustrator to InDesign.
They became like the Microsoft Office of creative applications. They're all integrated. You can't have one without the other.
Microsoft Office, man.
Well,
come on.
I know. They've gotten better over the years.
So it's I do think it's made it more accessible, and I do think my mom might now know what I actually do. That was always an issue when I'd tell people, "Well, what do you do?" "I'm a graphic designer." Like, "What?"
Yeah.
"What do you do?" I'm like, "Well, I design logos." They could understand logos and things like that, but the whole idea of designing an annual report or designing a big corporate facilities capabilities brochure, or even designing a book, how does that work? What is page layout? What does that mean?
Well, one of the things I mentioned early on was the town of Mount Pleasant. So people don't understand, something like that. It's something that is probably decided upon by multiple people going back and forth for what appears to be a simple logo. It's not an overly complicated logo, but it goes into their police force. It goes onto all the signage throughout the city, their website, any documentation. It's persistent throughout, and it influences. It says something about the town of Mount Pleasant. When you see that, you get an instant reaction, whether or not you are conscious of it, but subconsciously you've got a picture on what kind of community you're getting involved in.
Yeah, well, I hope that that when people see that they have a good feeling. It's always because I'm proud of that, and where it has come, how it has grown. Because that was a good while ago when we designed that for the town. And over the years, we have gradually helped them as best as possible grow that mark and apply it to all their different vehicles and a lot of different things, and really try and create some really good consistency in their overall look and colors and feel of the mark, because that's what a good graphic designer does. And I take pride in working with multiple people and trying to satisfy multiple people and make people happy and deal with a lot of approvals. So that's one of those projects that I'm proud of, and I think it was successful.
So when you're dealing with a client like that, something that everyone in the community is going to experience, how much does your environment of where you're at now, where you live now, how much does that influence your decision making into design?
Specifically for town of Mount Pleasant, would you say?
Well, no, not just town of Mount Pleasant, anything like where you live right now. That's kind of like the idyllic southern part of South Carolina, as far as if you get a classic southern town, you live in that kind of environment.
Yeah.
So how much does that influence your creativity.
The best part of it is I have a 2 to 4 minute commute,
Right.
from my house to my studio. So, um, I don't spend a lot of time not in my studio, and I'm in my town, and I'm working there. So, um, and I know this is probably sounding really weird, but um, each client I take as an individual. So where I'm living is not going to influence my design as much, except for the fact that I can spend more time on it because
Hmm.
I'm not in the car driving 2 hours back and forth to work, and it's just a real easygoing lifestyle. I mean, when I graduated from college, a lot of my friends, we had a really great that I still keep up with. Went to big cities like Dallas and Chicago and Austin and New York and to work for agencies or whatever. And my choice was, I was like, I want to go fishing.
Yeah.
Uh, so I moved to Charleston, you know, and I sacrificed making like $9,000 a year as an assistant art director, but I get this amazing quality of life, and a share rented.
Shh. Don't
What?
don't tell so many people that it's nice here.
They already know.
I
The word's out.
know.
And I always used to tell people, I was like, dude, man, we got bugs. Don't come down here. There's bugs. You don't want to live here, man. We got these little no-see-ums that eat you. You don't want to live
Oh
here.
yeah.
But no, yeah, when I moved down here, I share rental Front Beach, Isle of Palms, for like $150 a month. That was my first place I lived out of college. I mean, I'd walk out on the beach after work. Just amazing,
Yeah.
you know?
It's such an amazing place to live that it's easy to take it for granted, especially during like the middle of the summer when it gets really hot and you're like, oh, I don't know, is this worth it? But like any place, you can live in the most magnificent city in the world, and after a while, it just becomes routine, or um, it becomes familiar. But this is something about, I've been here for 15 years, and something about this area it's romantic. It's hard to get away.
Yeah, well, you talk about the heat, and the one thing about that I always tell people, and of course, freaking 100 degrees and 100% humidity, you just kind of slow down and take a
Right.
deep breath and slow your heartbeat down and just chill,
I have a
and
hard time with that.
and
Yes.
and it's a real Southern thing,
Hmm.
it's a real Southern thing, and a lot of people do have a hard time with that. Back in the day when we were talking about pre-computers,
Yeah.
um, I used to uh, every once, because Charleston's always been a super cool place.
Hmm.
And I really watched it change from when I moved here in '83 on up, and how it's grown and just really blossomed. But there would be folks that would, art directors that would move from Dallas or move from Chicago here, and either go to work for an agency. And then they were on the hyper big city mindset. They would
Right.
send type off and like, why can't I get this afternoon? And they would just yell and scream, and they wouldn't last. They would leave Charleston in a year
Yeah.
because it was just, they couldn't get type 24/7.
Exactly. Oh, and these days you can get that, because the world has gotten smaller with the way the economy has moved to more digital online. You don't have to feel like you're so removed, but you can't escape that 100% humidity.
No.
That's going to
And
force you to
and
slow down.
and that's what it's all about, is just, taking it in,
Yeah.
taking a deep breath, chilling, and slowing your heartbeat down so you don't sweat as much as you
So you seem to be
would.
someone who's very in tune with your desire to take it easy, to not.
That's my whole point in life, is to take it as easy as possible.
So do you ever, because I know that working in a creative industry can become stressful. I know from personally, maybe it's part of a problem within me, but it can become stressful. You can get overwhelmed. Do you find yourself able to deal with that because of your philosophy of taking it easy, or do you ever feel stressed or pressure under doing what you do?
Of course. I mean, I think everybody does to some point, but I've always been able to deal with deadlines and things like that pretty easily. One of the reasons is because I don't like people yelling at me.
Yeah.
So I get the work done, and I get it done and I don't sweat it. Um, but I've always been pretty laid back and I don't get physically stressed. And I guess I'm just fortunate that way. That doesn't mean I'm not going to have a heart attack tomorrow. I mean,
But there's something about what you just said that's really insightful. That if you get the work done on time and properly, you
then
won't
there's
be
no
stressed.
right, exactly. And
Yeah.
that's what I've always told my wife and everything and people that work for me is I get it done because I just don't want people to yell at me.
Do you find this ability to keep yourself focused on your work is because you love what you're doing, or is it more driven by avoiding that unnecessary stress?
It's probably some of both, but I'm a multitasker. I probably should have been I probably could benefit from some Adderall or something like that because I can get off focus really easy, but
Hmm.
I can also multitask. I can also do lots of things at once and go from one thing to the next thing to the next thing pretty quickly and back and forth. And so uh, I can and because of my experience and I've been doing this so long and 10 years on the boards and then switching to computer, I think that helped a lot in being able to uh, be pretty fast at making decisions, doing what I do. One of the things my professor used to push was every concept, you should have 100 sketches
Wow,
for every concept.
100 sketches.
He would make us do 100 sketches for each.
That's unbelievable.
And
Holy
it's
cow.
hard to do, but then after a while of working at that, you end up doing 90% of the sketches in your head.
Mm,
So you think about it and you become experienced with it and you got an idea for a brand or for a logo and you get the job and I might just be driving around thinking about it or laying in bed thinking about it and I'm running these visuals through my head and that eliminates sketches and then I can go straight down and go directly where I've been. So that's just experience when it comes to that.
yeah, I've watched like the process from the not from what you're saying, but to get to the same means through like focus groups where you got uh, people representative of the business or the industry that you're trying to create work for, and the amount of expense and work that goes in to get to that point where you just said that you just put in that effort early on and now you're able to do it in your head.
Yeah, and focus groups that when you get into a big project like that, where like when we did the College of Charleston brand identity for their academic mark and their athletic mark, we had the whole board and the president to deal with,
Wow.
but we also had staff and administration, and then we had focus groups that we prepared all these focus groups and did all that stuff. So a lot of times you have to do that, but then after that's all done, at the end of the day, you still got to sit down on the boards and sketch out and come up with ideas based on the information from the focus groups, and a lot of that's done in my head. Um, but I still sketch all the time, and I have tons of sketchbooks and
Wow.
that I draw in.
So this next question,
Yep.
it might be a little bit of a leading question that leads us into what I'm holding in my hand, but I might be completely wrong. Um, do you do anything for personal work? In other words, not just paid stuff. What do you do to kind of feed the creative spirit in yourself outside of, that's still in the design or artistic world?
Well, I still paint some. I still do
Hmm.
fine art, and I used to do a lot more of that. But yeah, so I'm kind of here to push my book.
Right.
You
Because
know,
I'm looking at this and I know there's not a lot of money in rock and roll. Uh,
no,
so
so
I would have to imagine that some of this was done out of love for what you were doing.
Listen, everybody that knows me, my close friends, from 1985, when I started my business in 85, I had close friends here and we always hung out and fished together and partied together. And I had musician friends. My wife was in the theater. She was one of the founders of Chopstick Theater in Charleston. And so I was connected to the arts and all sorts of people. And I did some work for a band.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Probably 85, 86. And I think the band was Rough Mix. It might not have been them. They don't exist, but now, I did some work for them just as a trade to do a t-shirt design or something. And I said, well, why don't you play a gig for me? And so that was the beginning of what we call the dog party. It was called Sample the Dog was the first one, which is my handle on Instagram at Sample the Dog. You can buy my book on there.
There you go.
So we started this party in 85 and we did it for almost 30 years straight. And I'd do work for musicians as a trade to play my party. And we had everybody from Will Hogue. I did his first CD, designed his first CD. He played the dog party one year. The High Strung. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They do the opening song for that Showtime show. But anyway, we've had a lot of great. Jason Isbell played the dog party. But we would just have this party at Goldbug Island every fall. It was called Sample the Dog was the basic party, but it all stemmed off of that. And so I did work for musicians. And so I got to know a lot of musicians. I always loved working for them. And so I'd trade for this party.
Uh-huh.
And like I said, we did it for years and years. And basically it was a free party. We would sell t-shirts that I would design and that would pay for the party. And it was free beer, free live music, on the water right there at the base of the Ben Sawyer Bridge.
Wow.
And it was a blast. And
it sounds like it. It sounds like a dream come true for, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that was, pre-social media, pre-internet, all that stuff. And it got to be pretty well known. It got to be pretty huge. And so then I've always had that. And my wife's a musician. She's the music director at the synagogue, Reformed Synagogue downtown, KKBE. And so we've always had a lot of musician friends, a lot of entertainment friends in that industry. And so when the opportunity came up, when Eddie called me, he's like, dude, I'm doing this barn jam. Would you do a poster for the barn jam? This was like 2008, I think, or 2009. That was like right when the recession hit.
Right.
When the door was slammed on work. It was like,
yeah.
And I said, well, I need something. Like you were asking me about what my outlets were besides corporate work and my real job was I did paintings. I did a lot of folk art type paintings, a lot of stuff like that. But when the recession hit, I was like, man, I really want to really focus hard on work. And I want an outlet where I can really stay busy.
Yeah.
And so I talked to Eddie and I said, yeah, I'll do one a week. And I didn't know how long it was last. So I started and I've probably done close to 650 posters since then.
Wow.
And so Tuesday night would be the barn jams on Wednesdays. Tuesday nights would be at the end of work, I'd start on the poster at like 5:00 and I might work till 10. I might work till 7, whatever it took to get it done. Sometimes I'd have an idea that I knew I wanted to do and I'd do it. Sometimes it just couldn't find something and I'd just work. But so I ended up with all these posters and I always posted them on Instagram. People loved them. And so I thought, I should make a book. So that's what I did.
And this is it's wonderful because, and the reason why I loaded that question beforehand to get to this point is because when I looked through, because you have a lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of them are on your website.
Yeah.
And when I look through them, I'm like, this looks like the work of a master of his craft doing something he loves. like doing something, using your skills that you're a master at, and also doing it because you could see the care and love that go into these designs. Even from the most simple ones to the most complex ones, they're all just, they're not thrown together. They're not haphazard. They're not lacking vision. You know what I'm saying?
I appreciate that,
and
Jeff.
and so that's why I'm so interested in like, people really should pick up this book if you're into rock and roll, art, design, any of those things. It's just like, yeah, this is how you do it. This is how you kind of feed your creative spirit when you're a professional. This is like how you get it done. One of the ways you can get it done.
Yeah, and it's really great to see it in print too, because they're all done 11 by 17, but they've, Eddie might print out a few for the barn jam, but basically they've all been digital.
Right.
So it's really great to do this book. And I also did it in a chronological order, from when I first started. I just went on the concept of jam jars, of like a jar of jam, because it was called the barn jam. And so that was where I started for the first couple of years. Everything had to do with these jars until I just got completely burnt out on it. I mean, if you look through just the few I put in there of that, and I say few, probably 50 or more, you can tell how I was reaching sometimes, and but then that evolved into where we got to the point where I was like, well, screw that jar, I'm gonna just do whatever. So then I started messing with guitars and music and things that related to music, and some things that would relate to the actual day, whether it was Thanksgiving come up, or like there's one I think I included in there where it was the barn jam was on April 15th, on tax day. And so I did a tax form on fire, as the poster. Exactly.
There it is. I opened right to it.
And it's nothing great, but it just kind of shows an evolution in how I'm thinking on that given day. I think there's probably a couple of hurricane ones. I always did a couple of hurricanes because there was always a hurricane blowing in during a barn jam at some point.
It's the inevitable tax you do have to pay for living in a beautiful place like Charleston.
Yes.
Is the fear that comes every time around this time of year, where things could get turned upside down, literally.
It's better than fire.
Yeah, I mean, you can run away from both, but there's a good chance that the fire is it seems a lot more.
Yeah, but you guys stay in California. You don't want to come to South Carolina. No. There's a bunch of rednecks here and stuff, and I'm one of them.
Yes, they're we're closed for. I was telling you earlier, my wife works in real estate, and it's pretty alarming how this has been her busiest year in residential real estate of her career. She's been doing it for over 12 years.
Wow.
And this has been the busiest year because everyone just is fleeing to a place like this. They're getting out of the big cities and coming to smaller cities.
Well, we've been super fortunate to be here during this pandemic, man. I couldn't imagine being in a one-room apartment with two other roommates in Brooklyn, or a larger city. Whereas, I got a yard and I can go outside and hang out outside and move around, and we can go to the beach. Well, sort of, but you know what I'm saying.
With the exception of Violet Palms. Screw those people.
What's going on with them? They lost their minds.
By the way, just so in case anyone has got the bug in their brain and they can't get it out of their head, what you were talking about from the High Strung is The Luck You Got, which is the theme song to Shameless, which is an amazing show.
Right. And, the High Strung played our dog party 2 or 3 times, and I got to know those guys. And one of the members, Josh, what's Josh? Mala. This is terrible. This is just my age showing, but he just wrote that book, Bird Box.
Oh, the one that became that Was it the one that
Josh
became the
Mallerman. Yeah, he
became
wrote
the
Bird
Netflix movie
Yeah,
that everyone
yeah.
like went crazy for
Yeah,
a minute there?
So Josh is like the lead singer, one of the singers, and he's got the high voice. He's an awesome guitar player.
Wow.
And in the High Strung. And I remember years ago when he was here, he gave me a manuscript that, like his first manuscript that he'd written of this book. And my son reads it, is a voracious reader, and I remember giving it to him to read. Now he was middle school, and I probably should have read it first before I gave it to him. I was like, "Why don't you read Josh's book?" And he came back to me and he was like, "Yeah, it was good, but I got in trouble at school because
Oh
my
no.
teacher saw me reading it, and then she read it, and she was like, "You shouldn't be reading this." And
Oh no.
but yeah, so that's a little interesting thing that the High Strung has that song of Shameless. They're a super cool band. They were always awesome, and they got a great story too. And now Josh is a famous novelist.
That's amazing. You know what? I didn't even know anything about the High Strung. I know I've heard that song because I've watched.
Oh,
Shameless.
go buy some of their records, man.
Heck
Their
yeah.
records are great.
I love this.
They're
I
great.
love this. I see. This is the beauty of getting to know people in the creative industry and getting introduced. Finding out all these connections and getting introduced to things that you might have missed or might not have picked up on. And yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, there's a weird story. I probably shouldn't tell this story, but I don't give a shit.
That means you should tell it.
When I was a friend of mine is good, a real close friend of mine is a good friend with Tim, the bass player of Driving and Crying.
Okay.
And so Driving and Crying was playing at the Music Farm one year when we were looking for a band for the dog party, and I'd had a few other people that were going to play. And David said, "Hey, go up there. Let's go up to the farm and see those guys." So I went up there, and they weren't really interested, and they didn't really want to have anything to do with us. And so, but I was in the green room of the Music Farm. Well, we got there, and the opening band was a High Strung for Driving and Crying, and I was like, "Dude, let's get those guys."
Yeah.
To play. And so I went back in the green room because I've always done work for the Music Farm. That's been a real fortunate to go back to one of the benefits of my business and knowing musicians and working for musicians and doing things like that allowed me to do work for the Music Farm for when they started through several owners, 3 different owners. I would do a lot of their posters and their calendars for the upcoming shows for years. And so I could just get put on the list for every single show at the Music Farm. So I've seen like tons and tons of kick-ass shows there. And so I was up there at the farm and I went in the green room after the High Strung to talk to them about playing the party. And I don't know if you've ever been in the green room of the Music Farm, but it had this bathroom in there and it was basically just a toilet. I mean, there was a door and you open the door and there was the toilet sitting perpendicular to you. I mean, sideways. If somebody was sitting there, they would be sitting in this little room, this little wall, And I was back in the green room talking to those guys and I opened the door to the bathroom right there and there's Josh sitting right there. He's like, "Hey, man." On the High Strung. And I was like, "Dude, I want you guys to play the party." I shut the door and they were like, "We're on." So they came down from Detroit.
Wow.
And played twice.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, I imagine one of the things I stressed about when I first moved here was I couldn't find the music scene. I didn't see what was going on. And now I've learned through talking to people like you and other people that have been here and, the music scene existed. It just wasn't the music scene I knew of, you know what I'm saying? That I grew to appreciate and like from living here. But it's a weird thing because a lot of the musical acts don't come to Charleston.
Yeah, they never came south.
If they go to South Carolina at all, they'll go to Columbia. But usually they just pass. They just skip South Carolina. They'll go from Charlotte straight to Atlanta.
Oh yeah.
And so you don't get a lot. So you see there's a lot of these pockets of independent music scenes that, as for a band like them, I bet you when they came here, they were like, "This is beautiful. This is amazing." they probably got excited and they would want to come from Detroit to Charleston for a show like that because it was like people hungry for that kind of
Yeah, you're absolutely
talent.
right. I mean, people didn't know what Charleston was. I mean, you listen to, uh, talk show host or whatever, and they just think Carolina is. They don't realize there's a North and a South Carolina.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really bizarre. But yeah, the music scene's gotten great in Charleston. And it has to do a
Yeah.
lot with with Darius and Hootie and those guys, and of course Michael and Carrie Ann, and people being real successful. Sisto recently, and then of course Kevin and Carter that started the Music Farm. They were a big push, and Woody Bartlett back in the '80s and '90s when he had '96 Wave. He was way into the Meat Puppets and that what I'd call alternative scene, but it was Uncle Tupelo and the Meat Puppets and Whiskey Town and that whole genre groove
Alt
there.
country and then
Alt
alternative. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like I remember seeing Uncle Tupelo at the farm and then seeing the first iteration of Wilco and, of course, Sunvolt multiple times. And Cracker was always here. I mean, Wesley Wilson. What was his name? Wesley Willis. I don't know if you remember Wesley
Willis, the black dude who played the piano.
Yeah. Wesley Willis would come play, and
dude, that guy is amazing.
Rock and roll McDonald's. Rock and roll McDonald's. Yeah, man, I love Wesley Willis.
I'll have to look it up, but I was on a compilation. I used to play in a band back in the day.
Okay,
and we were on a compilation of TV theme show covers that he was on there as well. That was just like, yes.
Oh man, Wesley Willis is the bomb.
And talking to the guy who put it together, like working with Wesley is exactly what you expected it to be. He was authentic.
Yeah, I met him a couple times at a couple of these Wave Fests because Woody would always bring him in.
Wow.
And
I had no idea that he used to come down here.
Well, Woody would have Wave Fest. Wave Fest was a big festival in the late 80s, early 90s. And I have a poster in my shop where on this one Wave Fest, there was Sunvolt, Wilco, David Byrne, Cracker, Seven Mary 3, what's his name? Piano player from North Carolina. Anyway, Jayhawks, Ben Folds, Jayhawks, all these on the same bill.
Wow.
I mean, it's just this phenomenal bill, and he just had great taste in music and had these connections, and the Meat Puppets were always part of it, which is a favorite of mine. And so the local scene for great local Charleston musicians, but there hadn't been any real breakouts
until
Hootie and
Driving and Crying, kind of, but they were more.
Yeah, Driving and Crying was a big part of that scene too.
Yeah.
We always listened to them a lot, and they would always be at Wave Fest. I think they were at that one with David Byrne too, and because Kevin Kinney, he's an American treasure. I think.
Yeah,
he's just a phenomenal songwriter, and those Driving and Crying records are great, man, and they're still great live.
Yeah, and now we've got Susto, like you said, Shovels and Rope have kind of broken out of here. Then you have bands like Band of Horses, which they didn't originate here, but I call them a Charleston band because they've been here for most of their career.
They came here.
Yeah. I will take them.
And they're great. And then you got my buddy Bill Carson. I don't know if you know Bill.
No, I don't know. I'm not.
Oh, dude, Bill he's a treasure for sure. Bill's just an amazing musician. Real close friends with Carrie Ann and Michael. Shovels and Rope. Check out some of Bill's records, man. They're some of my favorite records. He was actually mentioned in Rolling Stone years ago as one of the top selling records at this record store in Charleston. It's where they went to these cities and but yeah, Bill's legendary,
man.
But yeah, this town has tons of
talent. I see it when you start peeling back, you start finding it, and you realize one of the things I talked to with Tim Showers. He's a local pop artist. He does he makes his living going to comic conventions setting up a booth and drawing commissions for people and selling his work and all that kind of
That's
stuff.
pretty great.
Yeah, and it's such a who knew that you could make a living doing that? You know what I'm saying? Like when I think of art, I'm more in line with what you do and working for doing commercial work,
right,
to pay the bills, and then you get a chance to do your personal work to fill your cup, your soul,
your need.
Exactly. And to think of the ability to get rid of that part A and just do part B and still make a living off of it is pretty admirable. As a professional, I think most of the questions I've had here, you've actually answered through this conversation, which is amazing. Thank you. I like how when we first started talking, you're like, I'm going to be a boring interview. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here going like, this is amazing. This is fascinating. I love this. This is,
I got to sell that book, man.
Well, this is definitely a beautiful piece of work. I mean, it's printed beautifully, and again, everything I said, I have no reason to blow smoke up anyone's ass. It's exactly what I said. It's a work of passion from a professional who has the skill to convey, these ideas. Like you said, you would come up with these ideas pretty quickly the day before the event,
right,
and deliver them.
Well, what makes that fun and work is when I'm working for a client, which I love working. I love what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I love creating brands, creating logos, and doing the whole process, the whole corporate identity process, all the way through to signage. To directing signage and how it works. That's great, but there's always a framework there. There's a demographic I'm going for. There's whether it's a real corporate vector thick line mark or something more softer, there's always parameters that I need to meet, which I take it to its fullest extent and come up with ideas and present a lot of ideas to clients. But in the end, the client has to live with it. And so they're my approval and they have to approve it and everything's good. As long as check clears and nobody gets hurt, we're good. But when it comes to doing this, the reason I can crank these out is I got nobody to approve it but me.
Right.
I'm the end all be all. And there's been multiple times where I've finished this poster, on a Tuesday night. I'm down with it. I save it as a JPEG or PDF. I send it off to Eddie. And then I look at it again and I realize, that would be better if I changed this and this. And then I do it again. And then I send it off again. And then I'm like, wait a minute, what if I did this again? And I do it again. And I send it and say, don't post that one. Take this one. So it's always that's the difference between what's in this book and what I do for a living. But like you say, the skills and for me to be able to produce them fast like this and the concepts, it just keeps my brain working and my chops up, you know. Working for a client, there's just more parameters and I apply the same ideas and everything. It's just directed more focused.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's and you're doing it for a specific purpose with these people and at their discretion. There's a certain amount of editing that has to be done because that's what they're demanding of it. And they ultimately will make the final decision. You're the editor. You make the final decision in this book. And it's, like I said, it shows you love what you're doing with these. It's just each one it's amazing the quantity using the same venue. You know what I'm saying? This is quantity of work that you were able to create for the same venue. We're not talking about like somebody who does poster art for a living that does for different bands at different venues at different parts of the country, at different parts of the world. This is all for the same venue, and you were able to keep it fresh.
That's interesting that you say that. I've never really thought about it that way. But the other thing that plays into it too that I've always taken into account is a lot of these musicians that are playing, they're not famous musicians, and they might have some gigs around. And some of them are that come down and want to play the barn jam because it's gotten to be pretty well known. But they're proud to see their name on a cool poster.
Yeah.
And that also inspires me too. I might be working on the thing, and I'll listen to Eddie will send me the list of musicians and their links to their YouTube videos or live shows. So while I'm working on it, usually I'll play those. I mean, since the pandemic, we haven't done this, but
Yeah.
up until that craziness, I would listen to everybody and see them. And I'd usually, if they had videos, I'm not a big fan of videos.
Right.
I'd rather see live music, so I'd just go find them on YouTube and listen to them live. And while I do it, and so I kind of in the back of my head while I'm working on it, it's like I want these guys to to see the poster come out for their show that they're doing and go, wow, man, that's cool. I'm on that poster.
Right. Do you ever get them asking you to use if they could reuse your artwork?
Oh yeah.
That's
Sure.
awesome.
Sure.
Isn't that the best compliment?
Yeah. I really like that. Like I did this one for the Poorhouse. Poorhouse used it for it was a festival. I did this one barn jam. It's in there. It's a jar, and it's a jar of weed, of marijuana, and the big buds that are stacked up
The
in there.
devil's flower.
Each bud is either a guitar or
Mhm.
flying V, whatever coming off, and so the buds are made of musical instruments. And so years ago, a festival had seen that. I mean, that's probably 7 or 8 years ago, and wanted to put it on a T-shirt. So I sent them the artwork for that.
Wow.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah. It's one of those things that if you were to make money off of it, secondary to the original project, great, but that's not your goal. And when people come to you wanting that stuff, it's just like icing. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty amazing. In your current state, going through this year, has there been anything that has changed for the way you're doing work or the way you're perceiving work, art in general? Something that's changed because of 2020 being what it is in all its entirety that you see as a benefit or a positive that you're going to take with you going forward? Like, have you shifted in a way that maybe, hey, you know what? I should just keep doing this, or I've been introduced to something that I didn't think about before.
You mean as a silver lining of the pandemic to work, or?
I know it's a weird question. I should probably rephrase it better. Has something forced you to change or shift that maybe has instead maybe a silver lining, but has become something like, oh, you know what? I should do this. I should have been doing this all along, or I should do this, or I am into something now that I wasn't into before.
Yeah. I'm pretty much working by myself.
Wow.
And I mean, I have people that I sub some stuff out to, whether it's a photographer or writer
Mhm.
or stuff like that. But I've always had staff.
Right.
For over 30 years, I've always had at least 5 people in my shop. Me as primary designer, a couple other designers, account manager, and maybe a copywriter, something like that. And right before the pandemic, a few months before the pandemic, I decided to just totally scale down and just.
And that had nothing to do with the pandemic at the time?
No,
Wow.
not at the time, but it was perfect timing.
Yeah.
Because then, since I'd done it months before, then I could just come into the shop, leave my house during the pandemic, come to my shop, nobody else is there, work, do whatever I need to do in the studio, and then at the same time, really reaching out to current clients and potential clients, and letting them know that I'm lean and mean and fired up, because that's the other thing it does. It's empowering when you go back to where you started, as
Mhm.
in um, being a single designer. calling all the shots, doing everything. And I mean, I did a lot of the work anyway, but just being on my own is just empowering, and it refreshes you. You know, it's really refreshed me to the work, and I think my work has improved, um,
That's awesome.
and I get better. So I'm
Yeah.
real. I think that's been the best part of this pandemic. You know, if there is one.
Yeah. Well, I have to think that I'm so concerned about the creative community.
Well, I mean, I just heard your interview with Tim and talking about like Wolf Street and
Yeah.
because those guys, Keely and Dave, are good friends of ours. You know, we
Mm,
were always involved with theater. The Theater 99 guys are our best friends, and um, so we're real worried about that,
right.
and doing our best to donate and contribute and keep things going. I mean, I do think maybe in a year we'll be somewhat back to normal, but I mean, in the meantime, for 2 years for theater companies and comedy, I mean, just anything that has
Right.
entertainment, whether it's live music and all of that, it's just, the theater community is on a shoestring anyway.
Right. Right. And dance is another one that I've learned about
Dance,
where those, without donations, you won't have dance at all. And so when you take away not only the donations, but their ability to even perform, like what happens to
I mean,
those?
singing and laughing, and that's all super spreaders. I mean, it's like
Mm.
it's the worst possible thing, but it's our society needs that. I mean, we
Oh yeah.
need,
Imagine no Netflix
yeah.
or no podcasts or no entertainment during a lockdown. Imagine what that must have been like maybe in 1918. You know what I'm saying? Like imagine you think it sucked now,
Right.
you know.
Right.
We at least
Uh,
had Tiger King for a hot minute. You
yeah,
know?
there seems to be unlimited amounts of new shows coming out for sure.
They
But
figured it out. Yeah.
man, but no, locally, when we talk about locally,
Yeah.
we really right now is when we really need to support the arts as much as possible, and
It gets
and
me
people get out
worried.
there and donate. Yeah.
It gets me worried because trying to think like as you said, you as a graphic designer, besides the fact that your clients might be hurting, so you're not as busy with that, your ability to work doesn't change.
No,
Like
I
you
mean
said, you can go to the studio and do your job.
yeah, and the business has been good. I mean, like you were saying, your wife's
Yeah.
selling tons of houses. I mean, business has been good and steady.
Right.
Fortunately, I knock on wood, and but when it comes to everybody else, I mean, we got to really. It's disheart. You forget what you did on the weekends and what you did and how you scheduled stuff and you went to shows and you do all of that stuff and it's just gone.
Yeah.
And
But the people that made a living off of those things,
dude, I
you
got
just
friends that are, IATSE people, stage folks, and
mhm.
my good friend David Sanders, who has Charleston Backline, he has no work. They have no work.
It's refreshing to see when like these shows that are coming up in North Charleston at the Bend. I think most of them are
Right.
sold out at this point. I think
Yeah.
Isbell's playing. He
He's
just
sold
announced
out. Yeah. And
that.
I was going to get the Marcus King. I love Marcus King. I
Yeah,
was going to buy some tickets to that show.
yeah. They're. I mean, so that's
And Shovels and
people.
Ropes sold out
Right.
quickly.
People want it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they really are dying for this. I know I am. To think of a world without that stuff, I don't think theater itself is going to go away. But how are they?
Well, the one thing we get to look forward to, okay,
Yeah,
is that I've always stressed this. People have heard me say this a lot, and somebody else said this. I'm not taking credit for this, but the blues make great art.
right.
You know, out of World War II, World War II, great art. And this is a real situation where people are struggling, people are having tough, and a lot of blues, and there will be great art that will come out of this. Um, like, but you're talking about events. We were planning, me and Michelle, and my book was we were going to do some book signings and
Right.
and have live music because it's all about the music and have them at the Barn Jam and Theater 99 and things like that. But it's like that's why I went ahead and said, screw it. Let's go ahead and print these books and might as well get them done. And if I still have some, when everything gets back to normal, I'll do a book signing with some live music.
Yeah. You can have a re-release party, second printing party.
Yeah, that's good. Second volume. How about
there
that?
You go. Volume 2.
Right.
That's awesome. Well, I'm super happy to have met you. This has been an awesome conversation. You're an inspiring artist, a professional. You've been doing this. You've seen your own industry change, like completely,
for sure.
And you've survived it all, and you've thrived through it all. And I hope people will take a moment to go visit your website.
Yeah, it's gsgd.com or gilschulergraphicdesign.com.
Perfect.
GSGD is gotta sing, gotta dance. That's what I always tell people too. But it's really gilschulergraphicdesign.com. And just follow the prompts. And
the fact that you got a 4-letter domain tells you just how smart you were back in the day to keep that.
Yeah, that's lucky.
Yeah. On Instagram, it's
at Sample the Dog.
And then Twitter is Gil Schuler Design.
Gil Schuler Design, yeah.
Perfect.
I don't do a lot of tweeting. I leave that to the professionals.
Or the...
And I do have a Facebook page too, but I'm rarely, if ever, on Facebook. But I will be doing a post to a lot of folks that are my friends on there that can buy the book. And I think it's linked to my Instagram.
Definitely. Yeah. Pick up this book. Check it out, because it's, again, all the things I've said multiple times. It's a master class in graphic design, as well as just personal love for the product.
Well, thank you, Joe.
And
appreciate it. And it's been a pleasure to meet you too, man. I've enjoyed listening to your podcast too.
Oh, thank you so much. And I hope that soon we will be able to hang out at a barn jam or at the music farm to see some music, and hopefully we'll be in much better spirits.
Heck yeah. Maybe I'll see you in one of those squares out there at the Bend or something.
Oh yeah. I've got one for Susto.
All right.
I got some friends.
We're
all going to go there and we're going to will it into being, hopefully.
Groovy cool.
All right, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the JWN podcast. Before you get going, please take a minute and share this episode with your friends. And if you really liked it and want to hear more conversations with creative people, jump over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review it, or just send me a message at jwnpod.com. Thanks a lot. Have a great rest of your day. Peace!